Booomin Sports, your only destination on Radio Jaguar for all sports. Hosted by Jason Gonzalez, it's time to lock in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special episode of Booomin Sports on Radio Jaguar. I'm your host, Jason Gonzalez, and today we'll be doing a rewind of the 2019-2020 NBA season. But first, let me introduce our special guest, Bear DiGiulio. Not only is he a lifelong basketball fanatic, but he is my brother-in-law. Welcome, Bear.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Jason.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So many of you lovely listeners may wonder, why this season? What made it so special? One word can be used to describe this season. It was completely strange. From start to finish, this season was unlike any other. It started in the offseason. I mean, we had a free agency that was the best we've ever seen it. We have Zion, John Morant, Kevin Durant going to the Nets, joining Kyrie, which no one thought was possible. We had the Bulls, who actually did nothing at all. I mean, Thad Young, kind of brutal.
As a Bulls fan, it was painful, but what can you do?
I mean, it's a norm over here. We won't be talking that much about the Bulls, but we'll find out why later. We have Harden, Westbrook, new tandem. We have the new crew in LA, Kawhi and Paul George. And shout out Joakim Noah, who joined later. That's another whole story. But which team did you like going into the season, Bear? Because there was a lot of big threes that were formed during this summer free agency.
Because of Kevin Durant's experience with big threes and all that good stuff, him joining Kyrie Irving, to me, was the move that I thought was going to take the NBA by storm. And then, you know, as everybody may know, it didn't quite turn out the way that we all expected it to.
Absolutely. I mean, Kevin Durant, Kyrie, you got two guys who were championship DNA overall. Yeah. They had championships, they had playoff experience that you thought they were going to be a core for the Nets for the future. I mean, personally, I was really high on Kawhi and Paul George because the Clippers already had that solid roster going into the season. And they had 2 six-man of the year, which was unheard of. You had Lou Will, you had Montrezl Harrell, and then they fell off, and we'll see later how they fell off in the playoffs. But that free agency was completely stellar because from top to finish, you had the draft, you had free agents, you had new teams with new stars. It was a good offseason, not gonna lie. But then the regular season came around, and this regular season was start off normal. I mean, it started October 22nd, same old, you know. But then January hit, and then Kobe Bryant passed away. So that hurt everyone. I mean, I remember seeing tributes on the TV, and it was just a heartfelt moment. And it kind of hinted that the Lakers had to do something with this season.
Almost like they had to do it for Kobe in a way.
Absolutely. I mean, at one point, during the season, they had those patches, the whole KB patch. Yeah. I felt like that was big representation of what that season stand for the Lakers overall. But then the problems came around for the NBA, and the so-called coronavirus came around. We all thought it was just gonna be a flyover. During that time, I was actually in school, and I was like, "Oh man, it's just another week of spring break. We're all good." And then it got serious.
It didn't feel real.
Absolutely not. I mean, at one point, we turned essential workers. You know?
Yeah, we were essential.
Who would have thought? You know, all these places shut down, the malls, the restaurants, everything we could think of. Even the NBA. And it all came down on March 11th. March 11th was the day the NBA shut down. And why did that occur? Rudy Gobert. What a guy. That's all I could say.
He started coronavirus. Just kidding. But, you know, he was definitely the first one to kind of mock it openly, in a sense, where I don't know if you remember that post-game interview right before the season had ended. He was touching microphones and coughing on them, and you know, he was making a joke out of it because at the time nobody really knew the severity of what COVID/coronavirus was.
Yeah,
and then Rudy Gobert decided to just, you know, again, make a joke out of it, which I thought was funny at the time. But then it turned out like, you know, this is more serious than everybody's thinking.
Yeah, none of us thought it was gonna get this big. You know, maybe just like here in sections, but no one had it big till Rudy Gobert actually got it. That day stopped the NBA completely. March 11th, Rudy Gobert tested positive, and then they just did tracking of who was around that area. Then we later found Donovan Mitchell had COVID. And then from there, the NBA shut down. And that led to one of the retirements that we did not see coming right away. and that was Vince Carter. He was an icon of generations, and to have it end that way on a night that we didn't even know was going to be his last game.
It's crazy because I'm a slightly older than Jason. Growing up watching Vince Carter, people called him Vinsanity, half man, half amazing, Air Canada. Watching his career progress from the Raptors to the Nets to the Magic Suns. He's been on a lot of teams, but his retirement was just so overshadowed by everything that was happening, and nobody was talking about it. But it's crazy because he's arguably one of, if not the greatest dunkers of all time. He was a prolific scorer. He was a number one option on many of the teams that he was a part of. So it felt unreal to think that a man like this was retiring, but nobody was really talking about it because of what coronavirus was doing to the NBA.
What sucked the most was I don't think this game was even televised. They were having like this big tour for Vince Carter where he swapped jerseys with players, and then all of a sudden March 11th hits and it's over. I mean, we had so many questions during that time, and then one of the afterthoughts was Vince Carter retired, and not many people saw it besides the few in the area and where it was televised. So it was a very, very awful thing like that. Vince Carter retired unexpectedly, pretty much. But from there, the season shut down. We had more than 100 days turnaround till the NBA turned to the Walt Disney Resort. Mm-hmm. And what happened in the Walt Disney Resort was that only 22 teams, was it? Yeah, 22 teams were invited. And the Bulls didn't make it, so it was pretty bad, because they were pretty bad during that time. So only the 22 teams made it. We had a couple teams out of like the playoffs when the NBA's finished. Then that's when we had the play-in game. The play-in game had, who was it? The Trailblazers versus the Grizzlies. And throughout this whole play-in time, the Suns were going an 8-0 run during the bubble, and nothing came upon that.
You go 8-0 and still do not make the play-in.
It was crazy, yeah. Because Devin Booker. Devin Booker was on there. There was like that one point where like Devin Booker did not make playoffs at all. It was known for not making playoffs. And then you go 8-0 in the bubble. You're like, yeah, he's gonna finally make it. And nope, he's gonna have to wait another year. Yeah. Obviously, right now he's striving and killing it in the league, but it was crazy during that time. This playing game was the Trailblazers versus the Grizzlies, and it was a strange time because like the NBA implemented this play-in game for the coronavirus bubble season, and they wanted to have the 8th versus the 9th seed if they were, what was it, a couple games back? I want to say it was like 5 games back or something like that. 4 games back. If there were 4 games back, they could face each other for the 8th seed. And that game was completely nuts because you had Damian Lillard scoring 31 points. TJ McCollum having a really good season that time. He was scoring from anywhere. I remember that. You had Nurkic, who scored 22 points and even 21 rebounds at that point was even a record.
Wow.
Portland was just firing on all cylinders. And Damian Lillard at one point was like, he's the MVP of the bubble during that short time. It was truly special during that playing game.
The NBA did a good job of adapting. Coronavirus essentially shut down the world in a sense, but the NBA did a good job of taking the teams that were somewhat in contention, bringing them to the bubble, and people like Damian Lillard and the Trailblazers in general at the time, they used the most of that opportunity.
I like the playing game because now we're seeing it more implemented in today's NBA.
Yeah.
But that first playing game was completely unique because we didn't know what's going to happen. Some people didn't understand it. Some people thought there was like no chance the Trailblazers can make it. Then we get to round 1 where we had matchup after matchup, which brought bangers of games. Unfortunately, the Trailblazers did kind of get swept. They won. They lost 4-1 against the Lakers. I remember that because
a gentleman's sweep.
Yeah, a gentleman's sweep. Yeah, Charles Barkley already celebrating after game 1. And he brought the brooms and then nothing happened. But then we had matchups that were instant classics. People still talk about these matchups to this day. And one of the matches was Nuggets versus Jazz. And there were 2 players which everyone had their eyes on this whole matchup. Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell. Who did you want to win this matchup? Because a lot of people did not like the Jazz just because, what's his name? Rudy Gobert. and what he caused. But then you also had the Nuggets, who were like an up and coming team.
It was cool. I didn't have a horse in the race because these are not my favorite teams personally. But, guys like us, we like good basketball. So watching these two teams that nobody really had on their radar yet, we kind of saw the writing on the wall with the Jazz. They weren't doing much at the time, but we knew that their time may be up as a team before you trade some pieces away, which we end up seeing Rudy Gobert being traded. We eventually see Donovan Mitchell being traded, but this series kind of gave you hope that maybe this team, the Jazz, can work if these two players continue playing the way that they are. But we saw in this series with Jamal Murray and the Denver Nuggets, we have the future of the NBA in such good hands because of how well both of these teams played against each other. And this series going the distance was really something that made NBA fans care about what was going on in the bubble.
There was like rumors that Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell were in turmoil because Mitchell didn't like the whole touching the mics and all that stuff. He said like very unresponsible by Rudy Gobert. So there was turmoil in the Jazz organization during that time. But this series was truly a back and forth between two great teams. You had Jokic and Murray, who were really young. They didn't even reach their peak as we're seeing them right now. A lot of what I learned about this series was Jokic wasn't that passer just yet. He averaged 5.4 assists compared to now where he's pretty much averaging 10 assists a night, distributing the ball like crazy. He wasn't at that level because Jokic is averaging a triple-double now. Like, what are we talking about compared to his 26.3 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists during this series? He was nowhere near his MVP levels, but yet again, he made an impact. But the two men who were going back and forth are Murray and Mitchell. And as we see, it all started in game 1. It was an overtime game, and the Jazz had 57 points with Donovan Mitchell, and they lost.
Yeah.
They lost. And then Jamal Murray scored 36, but they lost in overtime. This was like the game that like truly demonstrated how important their guards were for this team. It was completely crazy game, truly nuts, because like these two guards were going at it, but no one saw this coming. That's the funny part.
Yeah,
like we knew Mitchell was like an up and coming star. We knew Murray was, I don't think, nowhere near what we thought he was going to do in this series.
No, this was definitely his showing out party where people saw how good he could be, and he was that guy for them.
He scored 50 in one game. He scored 50 twice, a 42-point game. They had, was it 1, 2, 3? They had 6 games. They were like completely high scoring games, and then down came to game 7, and it was a low scoring game, just rough basketball, just anything goes. And just by a bit, the Nuggets came out victorious in this series. And I don't know if you remember this, but like Mike Conley had that shot at the end. They had like a fast break towards the end. There were a couple seconds left on the clock. Conley shoots the 3 and it rims out, and that's how the series ended. And any NBA fan out there would have wanted to see that series for like 10 more games. That's how impactful this series was. And I believe this might be the best series in this NBA bubble.
It definitely, again, just showed how impactful Donovan Mitchell, we saw the potential right before our eyes. Jamal Murray, the potential. And like you mentioned before, Jason, Nikola Jokic hadn't even come into his own yet, but now look at him. Fast forward to 2023, he's a 2-time MVP.
These players were so like, they weren't mature yet. They didn't have the experience. They didn't have, I don't know, that it factor yet. This was a spark in the road where we're like, yes, Jamal Murray's going to be a star. Donovan Mitchell's going to be a star. Jokic, he's going to be a star. And that was truly a matchup to remember of all a bubble. Another matchup that came in the first round was the Rockets versus the Thunder. And this was a very fun team from what I remember. We had Chris Paul, who was previously on the Rockets, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was previously on the Rockets. He got traded for Westbrook. And Chris Paul was on this tour where he was like, I got to prove myself and work for that contract, because he had like one more year on his contract. So he joined Dennis Schroeder. He joined Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. And this Thunder team was super fun to watch. And that went to 7. I was very surprised. They had the Harden Westbrook duo. They were kind of shaky in the beginning. Also, another quick fact, they're running small ball during this. You remember that?
Yeah, I mean, remember the graphic of PJ Tucker in particular, playing him at center, and PJ Tucker's no short guy, right? I mean, in NBA standards, he may be considered shorter, but PJ Tucker, for example, looking it up right now, he's 6'5", right? Which, is not short. But when you're putting him up against a guy like Steven Adams, for example, who was on the Thunder at 6'10", that's a 5-inch difference right there. Yeah. So the Houston Rockets in particular really emphasize small ball, which, we still see teams do to this day, but back in the bubble, height, not that I'm saying height matters, but it was a unique way of playing basketball.
Absolutely. That was like their whole identity during this season too. Because they had PJ Tucker. Then I remember for the longest, they're like, we're not going to trade for a big man. I think we can do it with PJ Tucker running at center. That was a very strange time for the Rockets. And we see that not work out later on in the series. Another honorable mention for round one was the Clippers versus Mavericks. Oh, we remember seeing all the edits of Luka Magic just shooting that shot against who was it? Reggie Jackson, I want to say.
Yeah, Reggie Jackson, yeah.
Yeah, that was a nasty 3-pointer. So shout out Luka. He brought another player who sparked in the bubble. I was talking to you previously before this podcast about there was a second cancellation to the bubble. I feel like not many people realize what happened during the bubble. And one of the things was it was canceled during the playoffs, round one of the playoffs, exactly. It all happened during the Milwaukee Bucks facing the Orlando Magic in Game 5 of the first round. During this time, they had more social justice issues where Jacob Blake was shot by the police in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And the NBA players thought it's time to speak up and make them known that this needs to change. And by tip-off, both teams decided not to walk out. I mean, I think the Bucks first decided, and then the Magic came back. But they realized it's a bigger issue than basketball, and they walked into their locker rooms and did not return. It was a big problem. It was a big problem during this time. And I remember they had conversations in the media, players speaking out on social media about this problem. And it was truly a time where they wanted to use their voices more than being an athlete. And a lot of that time, it was like major players. We had LeBron talking out. We had Chris Paul talking out. And it all ended just because of a players meeting. I mean, they realized that a boycott was not going to solve anything. But if they can make an impact and make their voices heard while also doing the game that so many people loved, then it can work for everyone. Then we had round two. So we had the Lakers continuing their domination. They defeated Houston. Like we mentioned, that small ball did not work with Anthony Davis, who was on a tear that season.
A guy who, again, 6'11", and I'm not saying height is the only factor in basketball, but when you have Anthony Davis, who's near 7 foot versus being guarded by PJ Tucker, and PJ Tucker, as many NBA fans know, is a very good defensive specialist. But when you're hooking a shot in, and a 6'5" guy is trying to guard a 6'11" near 7 foot, it's going to create problems.
Absolutely. And then Anthony Davis was right in his prime, and when you go across the Lakers and PJ has to face Anthony Davis, there's no shot you can beat him. I mean, he was on a whole another level. Another matchup that happened was the Heat dominating the Bucks 4-1. Boston defeating the Raptors 7 games. But the matchup that really stood out to me was the Nuggets defeating the Clippers. And then here we go again. It was a Cinderella story right from the start. But defeating the Clippers, they're my favorite coming into the season. And they go down. The Nuggets became the first NBA team in history to come back 3-1 to force a Game 7. But this series brought a lot of questions up, mostly regarding what happened to the Clippers coaching. I mean, Doc Rivers, we know that he's historic for having that Celtics team, and then they fall. And then you got this Clippers team, and they fall. And then later on, before the bubble, after the bubble, we know what happened with the Philadelphia 76ers, unfortunately, and they fall. Yeah, it's an ongoing conversation for Doc Rivers, but this series demonstrated pandemic P, demonstrated Kawhi struggling, and you know how I feel about pandemic P.
Pandemic P, we joke, but we call that for Paul George, because Paul George prior to this series was saying he was essentially showing off that he's playoff P. So when you dub yourself a nickname like that, you gotta show up, right? Unfortunately, in that game 7, I'm copying Jason's notes here. He shot 4 of 16 in field goals. He missed 12 shots. He was 2 of 11 on 3-pointers. He only scored 10 points. And as a guy that calls himself playoff P, that's not so good. Kawhi Leonard didn't have a better game. I mean, he had 14 points, but he shot 6 of 22 in his field goals. 6 assists, 6 rebounds. It's not a horrible game by any stretch, but it's not a game 7 performance.
They both had inefficient games, and you both, Doc Rivers and that organization traded a boatload for these stars because they thought, oh, we already have this established team, like I mentioned earlier. Paul George and Kawhi, that's a championship waiting to happen. Money thought. But they were inefficient. I mean, they didn't have that many games together, as far as I remember. You have two guys who can shoot from anywhere. They can defend any position. And then that happens in the biggest game of the season. You give up leads after leads. You lose a series, which were up 3-1. Like, come on. In game 7, your starting lineup scores 48 points. That was awful. 48 points out of 89 points. Like, come on. 89 points for a team that stacked. Not to discredit the Nuggets, but like, come on, man.
On the flip side of that, again, taking notes from what you gave me, Jamal Murray scored 40 points in that game 7. He was an efficient 15 of 26 on field goals. Meanwhile, Nikola Jokic, 16 points, 16 points, 22 rebounds, and 13 assists. We were getting flashes of what Jokic was and what ended up he was going to become. And, team basketball matters.
Their lineup scored 90 points compared to 48 points against the Clippers. Like, that coaching of the Nuggets we saw brings championships. And this was our first taste of what the Nuggets could be like. And beating a team like the Clippers was no easy task. I mean, they had major, major stars from top to bottom. And Jokic and Murray got it done once again. And the Cinderella story continued. And then after that, we had the conference final where we had the Miami Heat versus the Boston Celtics. We had Jimmy Butler going on his own Cinderella story from the 5th seed, now facing the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference Finals. This series was just Bam dominating. I mean, your center was Daniel Tice. I remember game 1, they had Jason Tatum about to go down to the hole for possibly the game winner because there was like a couple seconds left. And then Bam Adebayo just blocks it right at the rim. And that was our first taste of what this series was going to be about. And
this was definitely a series I did not see coming from the Miami Heat.
No one. I mean, we knew they had the stars. I mean, they had Bam. They had a rising Tyler here who showed flashes in the regular season. But like 37 in game 4, like that's something that Jamal Murray does, and that's a starter.
Yeah.
Tyler Hero was coming out 6th man because of Duncan Robinson, who had a great season that year. The Celtics still had Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. They had a great lineup. I remember Kemba Walker. I thought he was going to do really good. I mean, 19.7 points in that series, but like it all came down to efficiency, and the Heat was the more efficient team during this whole stretch.
I mean, look at this. You had, for the Miami Heat, you had Bam, who was coming into his own. Jimmy Butler, of course, we know is a star, but those guys, like you mentioned, coming off the bench, guys like Tyler Hero, guys like Goran Dragic, who was having an insane series. Like you mentioned, Duncan Robinson, an efficient role player in Jay Crowder. This is the Miami Heat at that point were a great team, or I would say a good team, not great team, but they showed here that they are a great team because everybody played their role in an efficient manner. And that's why they ended up winning the series. What was it? 4-2?
Yeah, 4-2. And the number 5 upsetting the number 3. I felt like it was a constant. I feel like the bubble was really a constant upsets. Miami Heat was no joke. And we learned that because they made the finals. I mean, Jimmy Butler demonstrated that he was elite. We had Bam Adebayo showing that he was elite. It was just a great matchup overall. On the other side of the Celtics versus the Heat was the Western Conference Finals, and this was the matchup that I really liked because it was the Lakers versus the Nuggets. So this Cinderella run continued, but unfortunately it came to an end right here. And this was because, as we talked, they weren't there yet. I mean, Jokic wasn't how dominant as he was now. And LeBron James and Anthony Davis just were right in their prime, you can even say. At least Anthony Davis was, but LeBron James practically his prime. I mean, he averaged a triple-double during this series. And keep in mind, people were still not a fan of his work. And that's a lot to be said. I mean, triple-double, that's like the best you can do on the court. Like, come on.
This was, he was showing why he's a man that everybody, people compare him to Michael Jordan for a reason. This was the series that essentially, besides what ended up becoming of the finals, but LeBron just showed us who he actually is.
Yeah. 27, 8 rebounds, like 10 rebounds. I mean, he was completely going nuts in this series, but so was Anthony Davis. I mean, this was like a reoccurring factor. Anthony Davis was that guy during this time.
Yeah.
They traded Lonzo, they traded Brandon Ingram to bring Anthony Davis just for this situation. To face Jokic. Yep, it absolutely did. I mean, people were saying, "Oh, they gave up way too much."
When you win a championship, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Even make like the Western Conference Final because not many teams can do that.
Right.
And at that point, LeBron James needed that sidekick. They needed that number 2 option. And the Lakers during his first year was just a lot of young stars. And this was demonstrated why Anthony Davis was brought to this team. I mean, 31 points, 6 rebounds. Come on, you can't teach that. Like, he was that guy right there. In Game 5, the closing game, LeBron James and Davis showed out. I mean, 38 points, 10 assists, 13 rebounds for LeBron. Like, that's prime LeBron right there. And once again, doing it for Kobe, it's an ongoing trend. But like, we had Davis, who had 27 points, 3 assists, 5 rebounds. I mean, that stat line doesn't demonstrate how impactful he was in this series. As you can see, like, everything was red compared to the Lakers, the Nuggets compared to the Lakers. Like, come on. Like, they could only do so much. It was a young team of the Nuggets, to be fair.
And to be fair, too, the Nuggets ended up a couple years later, we saw, going to the NBA championship and winning. But they needed to go through these growing pains, right? Every team does. Every team has to fall, right, before they could rise back up. We saw the Nuggets do that, but this just wasn't, this bubble just wasn't their time yet. It ended up becoming their time eventually, but we call him the king for a reason. LeBron James showed why he's the king, and Anthony Davis seemingly the prince, the next man up of the Lakers franchise that is so historic with guys like Kobe, guys like Shaquille O'Neal, Magic Johnson. The Lakers lineage is just essentially unmatched unless you're a Boston Celtics fan. This is the Los Angeles Lakers.
It was such a great series. It was 5 games, but those 5 games were pretty close. I mean, they're a couple points off, 3 points off, maybe like 7 points off. It was a great series, and it showed where like the NBA was going towards. And this round, the veterans came out on top.
Yeah,
we had the Lakers' whole roster is pretty much veterans and Kuzma. Because Kuzmania out there just hooping,
running wild,
living life, Yeah, because it was Davis, James, Rondo, Dwight Howard, Danny Green, all these savvy veterans who had experience already of championships or at least playoff hopes, Yeah. And then the Nuggets, you had all these young players. I mean, Grant, Michael Porter Jr. was just starting out his career. It was a great series.
Yeah.
And then from there, here came the NBA Finals. After so much strikes, so much coronavirus fear around the country, around the NBA in general, here came the NBA Finals, where we had the Lakers versus the Heat. We had the Cinderella story of the Heat, because they were the 5th seed, to be fair. And then you had the Lakers, who started off as the number 1 seed, but there were so many hurdles during this time because we didn't even know there's going to be basketball. They still had to keep form from that hiatus between the bubble and like the first regular season starts. This year's I really enjoyed. I mean, everyone was at home, everyone watched it. It was a great time. And it started off with the Lakers winning 2 games. Everyone thought, I was like, oh, it's over. It's Jimmy Butler said no. Jimmy Butler said, I'm gonna drop 40 on y'all. 40. I want to see he got a triple double that game as well. Yeah, I want to see he got, what was it? Yeah, 40, 11, and 13. People were comparing it to Allen Iverson. I remember it was like, oh yeah, it's facing this mighty Lakers team. And Jimmy Butler's that guy who's gonna try to carry them to the promised land and win a championship. And unfortunately it didn't happen. But it was a great series overall.
Yeah, it was a great series. You couldn't have wrote a better storyline, right? I mean, LeBron James coming in as the number 1 seed, going against his former team, the Miami Heat, his former head coach, Eric Spoelstra, who led this team, the Miami Heat, to the NBA Finals. That I can't imagine anybody putting this on their bet slip, right? The Miami Heat going to the NBA Finals. And that's not a knock on the players or the coach. It's just everybody just assumed in the Eastern Conference it was going to be either the Philadelphia 76ers or the Boston Celtics, who the Heat had just defeated to get here, right? It felt like it was a crazy turn of events that the Miami Heat even made it this far, let alone winning, 2 games of this series?
Yeah, 2 games.
It's almost like it wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. It's just, again, experience. You know, LeBron has been to the dance before. He's won multiple championships. He's got his sidekick in Anthony Davis, who in this series is averaging 25 points and 10.7 rebounds per game. Like, how do you stop that? And Bam Adebayo, as great as he's been this whole playoff series, you know, he held his own. Don't get me wrong. He's averaging 15 points and 6.3 rebounds per game. But again, it just goes, LeBron James.
Mickey, yes, absolutely. But yeah, this Heat team is pretty young. I mean, yeah, Jimmy Butler, who was his second season on the Heat. I know they're professionals, but that's a new core of players.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a new core of players. And yeah, Tyler Hero coming in that draft. He's a rookie this season, and he was showing out. Duncan Robinson's barely coming into his own as was he undrafted or like late round pick?
I believe he was a later round pick, or I think you're right. He was either that or undrafted, but it's crazy that, he came into his own, perfected his role as a sharpshooter, and helped that team become what they ended up becoming, which again, they haven't won a championship with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo yet, but they've made multiple finals appearances.
A lot from this playoff run. He got a bag from this playoff run.
Justifiably.
He was on fire all throughout. For a sharpshooter to score that many points, he was spot on. But the game 6 was the culmination of the NBA bubble, which brought LeBron scoring 28 points, 10 assists, 14 rebounds, and Anthony Davis 19, 3, and 15 rebounds. Like, those dynamic duo, you can't say enough because they dominated all throughout this playoffs, from the start to tip off to all the way till the end at game 6 of the NBA Finals. And I felt that the Miami Heat gave it their all. I mean, Jimmy Butler, 45 minutes, 47 minutes, all throughout this playoff run and this final. He gave it all. And game 6, you saw how tired Jimmy Butler was, because he wasn't the most efficient. He had 12 points, 8 assists, 7 rebounds. For any other guy besides Jimmy Butler, this would be a great game.
It's a solid game, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't efficient in this game, but after you do so much for the Miami Heat in this run, a bad game's sure to come. I mean, a player can only do so much,
Yeah.
Like, he carried the Miami Heat.
Absolutely.
And like, how many people joke? Many people say this is a Mickey Mouse ring for the Lakers, and calling LaMickey, but LaMickey scored every single game, high numbers. I mean, throughout this series, he averaged 29, 12 rebounds, 8 assists in 6 games. I mean, it's the reason why he won the most valuable player in the series. And he got 4 championships. I mean, he's right up there in the GOAT conversation just because of this bubble run. And people still discredit him for all the work he's done.
People always will. And it's just the nature of the beast. It's so hard to determine who the GOAT, the greatest of all time, actually is, especially in a sport like basketball where guys aren't competing in different eras. You know what I mean? Like, you're never going to get Jordan against Kobe, against LeBron, because it was different. I mean, Jordan, Kobe did happen, but like Michael Jordan and LeBron never played against one another. It's different eras. It's a very, the GOAT topic is very subjective, right? But LeBron, year in and year out, especially in this particular series, showed, okay, I may not be 6-0 in the NBA finals like Michael Jordan is, but I've won a championship with now 3 different franchises. It's a crazy stat that, people, like you said, discredit, but at the same time, it's hard to ignore.
Absolutely. And he won, was it Finals MVP with all the teams he's been with. And that's something huge to say. Even making a finals with all your teams is good in general. This playoff run, many people may discredit him, but it was one of the greatest runs I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It all came in the bubble, and the bubble brought many interesting things in the world, in the NBA in general. I gotta ask, Bear DiGiulio, what was your most favorite thing that happened in the bubble? I mean, we had incredible matchups. We had funny things that at times shouldn't be mentioned. Shout out Lemon Pepper Lou. And then Crazy. We had just like funny moments that happened in the bubble. So what was your special moment during this season?
I thought it was cool that they did have the virtual fans. I'm glad that people got to be involved in some capacity, but my favorite part was just the fact that the season ended up not being canceled, because as an avid, because as a basketball fan, it was weird to think that the season would not continue and there'd be such an asterisk, right? Like on the season, nobody would know who the champion would become. And then we get the bubble, which turns out to be, I thought, an awesome series of events. It felt weird at the beginning because there was no actual audience, some people here and there as part of, the players' families. But I guess overall, like, my favorite part was just the fact that it didn't end up canceling. So what about you, Jason? What did you think was the most interesting part of this whole thing?
That's very hard. I mean, there was like a small hiatus between the regular season and the bubble, and along that hiatus, I really enjoyed how the NBA treated their fans. There was like constant like NBA 2K, like new games to play, like different modes and stuff like that. But what I really enjoyed was the watch along games. I don't know if you remember that. YouTube used to have like old school games where they like showed Derrick Rose's like playoff game. They showed the old Chicago Bulls dynasty NBA finals. And it was a really good time because I remember everyone was at home. Everyone hopped on Twitter, talked between fans like, oh my God, did you see Jordan drop 50 on them? And I really enjoyed how the NBA treated this hiatus. And this hiatus was short, but very memorable to me. And I agree with you. Like the fact that a season happened in the bubble was tremendous. I mean, a lot of work happened to do it. I mean, there was constant measures of people being isolated inside the bubble just to prevent COVID not spreading. And that's a major thing to say. And the fact that nothing happened because every measure was to its point, that's something to be applauded for. And that's a reason I want to do this podcast. Because like I said before, it's completely strange. We didn't see this ever happen before. There were hiatuses because of contracts, but like nothing in regard to something that affects someone's health. And the fact that we had this playoff run with memorable games, just anything that made us smile overall was a great achievement by the NBA.
Absolutely.
And I can't say much, this NBA was overall no other. We didn't have anything like this. I mean, there's 2 cancellation, classic games in all rounds of the NBA. It was truly a unique experience for players as well as fans. And with that being said, thank you, Bear DiGiulio, once again for accompanying me into the past. This has been Booomin Sports on Radio Jaguar with your favorite host, Jason Gonzalez. Until next time, thank you, Bear.
Thank you, my favorite host.
Thank you for listening, and remember, business is always booming, so make sure to tune in to the next episode of Booomin Sports on Radio Jaguar.